Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf, which is Eruvin Ayin Beis. We're on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Towards the bottom, perhaps let's back up to the beginning of the Brisa, which will introduce us to today's Gemara. The Brisa discusses a machlekes between Ramei and Rabbanan, pertaining to a question as follows. We know there's a process called Eruv Chatzeres, a process called Shituf Mavos. Are these two things connected with each other? Meaning, do we need to establish an Eruv Chatzeres and Shituf Mavos? According to Ramei, yes, they are considered to be two independent endeavors, and one does not substitute for the other. Whereas according to Rabbanan, only one of the two are required. One will substitute for the other. Let's see the Brisa. 9 lines from the bottom. My Rabbi Meir, my Rabbanan. Where do we find these two shitas? The Sanya. Ma'arvin b'chatzeres v'pas. We're meant to establish an Eruv Chatzeres using bread, specifically bread, as Rashi explains. It's a staple food item, and you're trying to create a makom dira here. By collecting that bread and putting it in one of the homes of the Chatzer, that's becoming the makom dira for all the members. Now a person's mind and heart is focused at the place of his sustenance. So in this case, bread is required, which is a person's primary source of sustenance, and that becomes his makom dira. This house becomes the primary residence for all the members of the Chatzer, and now they've all joined together. It's as though there's only one residency in this Chatzer, and this allows them to carry throughout the entire area. Or if they go ahead and take that bread and bring it next door, so first they collect the bread from all the members of this Chatzer, they'd like to connect to the neighboring Chatzer as well through a doorway. So they take this bread, bring it next door, place it in the home, one of the homes next door. By doing so, once again, they merge together all the residencies. It becomes one singular residence for all, and allows them to carry throughout both Chatzeres. So how is this accomplished? Specifically using bread. If they wish to use wine, that doesn't work, because it's not a staple food item. However, when it comes to Shituf Mavos, which is merely merging together the usage areas, the alleyway, which is not a place of residence, not living quarters, therefore bread is not required. Wine is enough. Taisa says apparently they would prefer wine, perhaps due to its added prominence, but really any food works fine. They do the shituf throughout the Mavi using wine, collecting wine from all the Chatzeres, thereby creating that partnership in the Mavi. It becomes one joint, one singular usage area. If they wish to use bread for the shituf, that's only fine, it's better than wine. Continues the Brisa. One must establish both. He must do Eruv Chatzeres and Shituf Mavos. So for instance, if we've collected bread from all the members of the Chatzer, and then connected to the Chatzer next door by bringing the Eruv bread through that doorway and merging together with the Chatzer next door. So once you've connected the two Chatzeres, do they need to go ahead and go through the additional procedure of collecting more wine for the Shituf Mavos to allow them to carry through the alleyway? Is that necessary? Perhaps not, because once we've already connected the members of the two courtyards, one to the other, we've already created that partnership between all the Chatzeres here. Why do you need to go ahead and make another collection? Collect some wine from both Chatzeres to allow them to carry in the Mavi. They're already being established as one singular entity. That's one question. Then the next question would be, let's say you made a Shituf Mavos. So you've collected some wine from all the Chatzeres. You've now merged together all the residents of all the Chatzeres. So this Shituf, theoretically, should be all-encompassing. All the Chatzeres, with all the members within, have already joined together. They've become one single entity. So why, after you do Shituf, do you need to proceed and also do Eruv Chatzeres? Says the Brisa, Ma'arvin b'Chatzeres u'mishtatzin b'Mavi, both procedures are required. One cannot be applied for the sake of the other. Why? Simply to keep the children mindful. They shouldn't forget about the concepts of Eruv and Shituf. They won't realize what's going on. Theoretically it would work, but the kids will see look, an Erev Chatzeres was done, but not a Shita of Mavois. How are we carrying in the alleyway? Or conversely, they'll see a Shita of Mavois, and they won't see an Erev Chatzeres, because let's remember, the Erev Chatzeres is placed in the home, and the Shita of Mavois is placed out in the open. Right? It's meant to merge together the usage areas, so it's placed out in the open. So they'll see the Erev Chatzeres sitting in the house. They'll say, how are we carrying the Mavi? Where's the Shita? They'll see the Shita of Mavois sitting somewhere in the Chatzer. They'll say, well, that takes care of the alleyway. What about the Chatzeres? How are we carrying the Chatzeres? They won't realize that one can compensate for the other. They'll simply conclude, they'll say, look, our parents neglected, they didn't make the Erev. So that's why you have to do both, to make it visible for the children. No, it's not necessary. One or the other is okay. Meaning, once you have merged together the Chatzeres through collection of bread, right? You've taken the bread from this Chatzer, brought it next door through that doorway, put it in the home next door, thereby connecting the two Chatzeres. No more needs to be done. The Chatzeres have already been connected, and you don't need to go ahead and make another collection for the Shita Mavais. They're already one singular entity, and they can go carry through the Mavi. Likewise, if you do a Shita Mavais, that's already all-encompassing. All the Chatzeres, with all the residents contained therein, have already joined together. They've become one single residence, one single entity, and now you can carry throughout the entire area, the Mavi, the Chatzeres, without any concern. Continues the Gemara. There's actually a machlokes between Rechumi and Rabbah. How exactly we went to apply this machlokes? What is the context of their discussion? Chad Amar, one said like this: the pas, if the collection was with bread, meaning they did the Erev Chatzeres between the both courtyards using bread, or if they did the Shita of Mavois using bread, which was above and beyond what they needed to do, in this case, it's going to work. The Kuli Amalei Pligi the Bechad Sagi. All agree, even Rameh agrees that one is enough. Apparently he holds that bread is more prominent, more significant, and is visible to the children. And therefore, if the Erev was done using bread, or the Shitaf was done using bread, that's all you need. This process is now considered to be all-encompassing, everybody has merged together, and nothing more is needed. Ki Pligi B'yayin. The machlekes only pertains to where they used wine. So they made the Shit of Mavois by collecting wine. Now, wine technically only works for the Shit of Mavois, but not for the Erev Chatzeres, which requires more than that. Trying to generate a Malkam Dira, that requires a stable food item like bread. So there Rameh says, well, you've only accomplished a Shit of Mavois. That can't be applied to the Erev Chatzeres. You do a special collection for the Erev Chatzeres. Whereas the Rabbanan say, you're right. Generally speaking, bread can't be used for the Erev Chatzeres, but in this case, since it works, it's valid for the Shit of Mavois. So if you've established a Shit of Mavois using wine, it's a valid Shit of Mavois. Once that's been activated, once that takes effect, that's all-encompassing. That already includes all the members of all the courtyards, and there's no need any longer to make it Erev Chatzeres. So that's one approach to the machlekes. When it comes to bread, there's no discussion. All agree that one collection can work for the entire area. The question is when they used wine for the shitaf. Rameh says that's not sufficient for the Erev Chatzeres. According to Rabbanan, it can be applied for the entire area as well. V'chad Amar, and the other approach was, the other one said, B'yayin d'kulei amalei pligi d'bin etarti. If there was a wine collection for the shitaf Mavois, all agree, even the Chacham agree, that can't be applied for the Erev Chatzeres, which requires bread. So all agree, two collections are required. After you do the shitaf, you need to proceed and do the Erev Chatzeres as well. Ki pligi b'pas. The machlekes only pertains to bread, which is more prominent and significant. So according to the Chachamim, once you've collected bread for either for the Erev Chatzeres or for the Shit of Mavois, that's all you need. That's all-encompassing. You've already merged everybody together, you created one usage area, one joint residency, and you're taken care of. Whereas according to Rameh, we're concerned about the children, we want it to be visible, therefore two processes are required. Says the Gemara, Meisve, we have a kasha from the Brisa that we just mentioned, to one of these approaches. Chachamim clearly say, either make Erev join together both chatzeros, and the assumption is that you want to use bread, or make a sheet of mavois, and that's enough. Takes care of the entire area. My love, shall we not assume? Either you're making an erev in the chatzar using bread, which is required for the erev, and that will be applied for the shitav as well. That's all you need. Or when the Chacham say oy mishtatfen, they mean you can make shitav mavois using wine, which is a standard material used for the shitav mavois, and that can be applied for the erev chatzeros. So this is a kasha on the second shita here, which says that wine certainly cannot be applied. Meaning, if you do a shita mavois with wine, that cannot be applied for the erev chatzeros because wine does not work for erev chatzeros. So this shita maintained that all agree, even Chacham agree, if you do shita mavois with wine, it cannot encompass the erev chatzeros. And here we have a clear brayso, which seems to tell us that according to Chacham, either way you're okay. Either if you did the erev with bread, that can be applied for the shitav. If you did the shitav with wine, it can be applied for the erev. And the reason was, as we said earlier, because the fact is it works for the shitav mavois. It's valid for its purpose. So once it's been activated there, it's all encompassing and includes even the chatzeros. Says Umar, no, not so fast. Amar Rav Gidal Marav, Hochi Kamar. This is what the brayso means to say. Ayim Arvin b'chatzar or pas. Umar Taran kan v'kan. You have a choice. Either make an erev chatzeros with bread, and you'll be mutter in the chatzeros and the mavoi. It can be applied for both. Ayim mishtatrin mavoi b'pas. Umar Taran kan v'kan. Or make a shitav with bread specifically, and then it's going to work. It's going to work for the mavoi, it's going to work for the chatzeros, and you're all covered. Okay, so in summary, we have machlokes in Rav Meir who says ma'arav and mishtatrin. You need to make both erev and shitav. Rabbanan say one or the other. Ma'arav and mishtatrin. We have two approaches. According to the first approach, if they have used bread, all agree only one process is required. That can be applied for both, for shitav and for erev. The machlokes pertains to wine. So if they did the shitav with wine, Rav Meir says that's not valid for the erev. So it only works for the shitav, and you need to make an additional erev. Because Rabbanan say, since it's valid for the shitav is an all-encompassing process and will include the concept of erev chatzeros as well, and no more is required. According to the second approach in the Gemara, when it comes to wine, all agree. Since wine is not valid for erev chatzeros, it cannot be applied for erev chatzeros. So if you made a shitav in with wine, you need to additionally do the shitav, the erev chatzeros with bread. The machlokes applies to the case where they actually use bread. In this case, the Chacham say one's enough. As long as you did the erev chatzeros or the shitav mavois, since you use bread, it can be applied to both areas. But according to Rav Meir, concerned about the children, therefore, even if you use bread, you must go ahead and establish both things, erev chatzeros and shitav mavois. So how do we conclude? It says the Gemara, Amar Bida Marav, halacha Rav Meir. They were meant to do both. Rav Huna Amar, minak Rav Meir. The minak is like Rav Meir. Rashi explains that we don't publicize it. Halacha means we publicize it as the halacha, whereas minak just means that privately we'll instruct the individual to follow the shita. Perhaps the point is not to negate the majority view, the shittas chachamim. For Rav Yochanan Amar, no guham Rav Meir. The Am was noyeg, like Rav Meir, meaning we don't instruct anybody to follow Rav Meir, but if somebody does so, we don't protest and require him to undo it. Continues the Mishnah. Chamisha chaburoi sheshavso b'traklin echad. Let's say you have 5 chaburis, 5 groups of people who decide to spend their Shabbos in a traklin, this large-sized room, which featured partitions. It was subdivided. So now we have one big makom, but divided the subdivisions. Temporary mechitzis, dividing the chaburis. The question is, should we look at the traklin, which is one large size area, one makom, and treat these chaburis as one happy family? And they don't need to have an erev to carry from one subdivision to the other. Or perhaps should we focus on the mechitzas here, despite the fact that they're temporary mechitzas? Well, they create separate usage areas. We have separate places of residence. And they need to make an erev in order to transfer one to the other. So that's one manifestation of this question. Another ramification would be, let's say there are other people living out in the chutzner. So these people, these chaburis in this traklin, are sharing a courtyard with other people living in other homes. So an eruv is required. The question is, how much do they need to contribute? Are they considered to be one dir, one residency, and therefore only one portion of bread is required on behalf of them all? Or perhaps each chabura needs to contribute independently because they're considered to be separate places of residence. So there are two nafkaminas to this question. So which one is it? Rabbi Machlekes. Chamisha chaburas shishavsu b'traklin echad b'sham oimrim eruv l'chol chabura chabura. Each group requires its own contribution to the eruv because we focus on the fact that they're living in separate places of residence, separate usage areas. They're divided by these temporary mechitzas, and that makes them separate mekoymos dira. They don't have to contribute to one eruv for the entire bunch here, because they're sitting in one area, in one traklin, one makom, one house. They're considered to be one residency, and therefore they don't need to contribute more than one portion of bread. And likewise, according to Beis Hillel, they could transfer amongst themselves because they're sitting in one home. Whereas according to Beis Shammai, each one is like a separate home. In order to transfer from one to the other, they have to create an eruv. Concludes the Mishnah, certainly all agree with if some of them are residing in separate rooms with permanent mechitzas, in different floors, upper floors. In this case, certainly there's separate places of residence. You need to make a separate eruv for each group. Each one has to contribute it independently to the eruv in the chutzner. Let's take a look at Rashi, 11 lines from the top. It says Rashi, Masnisin b'traklin echad. So 5 groups are residing, spending their Shabbos in one traklin, one huge room, v'chalku l'chamisha, and they subdivided it into 5 parts. V'kulon yeshlam pesach min traklin l'chutzner. Each group has its own pesach out to the chutzner. V'tzorach la'arev im shabnei chutzner. That requires them to make an eruv with the other members of the chutzner. So how do they go about it? We regard them as separate entities. Each chabura has to contribute bread to the chutzner, to the eruv. It's like 5 homes. Likewise, if they would like to carry from one subdivision to the other within this traklin, an eruv is required. They're like 5 separate homes. No, ein mechitza zu chilek rishus. This mechitza doesn't create a chilek rishus, doesn't separate it into different domains. The mechitza shveli, it's a low down, weak mechitza. Can the farish Gemara, as we'll soon see in the Gemara. Hilkach eruv echad kulan, when they contribute to the eruv with the other members of the chutzner, they only contribute one portion on behalf of them all. That's number 1. And number 2, within this traklin they could transfer to an eruv. Because this traklin combines them all. The Ritva says that the traklin is mevatel, those temporary mechitzas. It overrides it, because it's really essentially one room. And since they don't need to make an eruv amongst themselves, so now when they join with the other members of the chutzner to make an eruv, one person can represent them all. Damrin l'kaman, as we're going to see soon. Chamisha shegavos Eruvin. You have 5 people collected eruv. 5 people living in a chutzner, each one in his own home. And they made an eruv amongst themselves. Now they've merged into one single unit through the eruv. They wish to connect to the chutzner next door. One of them can represent them all, because he's not an independent person. He's part of that unit. He's part of that communal entity called eruv. So likewise, in our case, according to Beis Hillel, the people living in this traklin are by default connected, one and the same, even without making an eruv. And therefore, when they go ahead and they join with the eruv and the chutzner, only one of them needs to represent them all. They don't all need to, each one need to go and contribute to the eruv. The Mishnah concludes, so we have really separate rooms or different floors. The Havalu when we really consider it like 5 homes. In this case, we don't compare it to the case of 5 people that have already made an Eruv amongst themselves. Because bottom line, they didn't make an Eruv. We have a person living in this floor, a person living on the upper floor. There's no connection here. In this case, they're viewed as 2 separate domains, 2 separate families, 2 separate rishuyos, and they need to each one contribute to the Eruv independently. Continues the Gemara. So, what type of mechitzas, what type of temporary mechitzas are present here? How high? Amar Rav Nachman, machloikis b'mesipas. The discussion now, Mishnah, between Beis Shammai, who regards these subdivisions as separate entities, and Beis Hillel, who say, no, the Traklin overrides everything and encompasses everything, is discussing a case where it's mesipas. We have low down, very low mechitza. Rashi says they use chatichas eitzim, pieces of wood, very low down mechitza, less than 10 tefachim. So it's a flimsy mechitza. That explains things. Aval mechitza asora, but if it's 10 tefachim high, which is a din, has a sheer mechitza, they all agree, Erev l'kol chabura chabura, each chabura needs its own Erev, meaning this mechitza asora tefachim creates that real separation. And each subdivision is regarded as a separate entity. Igadamri, Amar Rav Nachman, there's another version of Rav Nachman, Alpha Masipas Machlekes. The Machlekes applies to both cases. Not only to Mechitza, which is Asar Tfachim, even if it's just Masipas, we'll have the same Machlekes. Meaning, whether it's a low down Mechitza or it's a high Mechitza, Beis Shammai will say, subdivisions are separate entities. Whereas Beis Hillel will say, no, the ceiling of the Traklin overrides everything and merges them together. They're considered to be one happy family. Continues the Gemara with another approach, how to explain Machlekes. Pligiba, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi. So Machlekes between these two, how to interpret the Machlekes. Chadamar once said, Machlekes Mechitzes, Hamagias L'Tikra. The discussion now, Mishnah, pertains to Mechitzes which reach all the way up to the ceiling. Yeah, over there, Beis Shammai say, well, they really create proper subdivisions. Look, they go all the way up to the ceiling. And we don't see the ceiling overriding anything. Mechitzas really reach the ceiling and create that separate entity. But when these mechitzas don't reach up to the ceiling, so there's some space between the mechitza and the ceiling, in which case we see the ceiling as though it's encompassing everything and overriding those mechitzas. All agree, Eruv Echad L'Kulan, one Eruv on behalf of all is enough. Meaning, they're considered to be one combined entity. V'chadamar, the other mandamar maintained, Machlekes Mechitzes She'ein Magias L'Tikra. The Machlekes in our mission pertains to mechitzas that don't reach up to the ceiling. Yeah, over there, Beis Hillel hold, since they don't reach all the way up, they're not really worth much. The Traklin is machaber everything. The ceiling which goes over those incomplete mechitzas really overrides them and combines them all together, all the units together. But if should those mechitzas reach all the way up to the ceiling, in which case these subdivisions are visibly separate domains, all would agree, even Beis Hillel would agree, tzrichen eruv chabura chabura, you need to make a special separate eruv for each group, because they're really subdivisions, separate entities, separate rishuyos. So just to surmise quickly, we have Rav Nachman's 2 versions, and we have Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon Rabbi. Rav Nachman initially said that the discussion on Mishnah pertains to mesipas, mechitzas which are flimsy mechitzas, less than 10 tefachim. But if it's 10 tefachim high, all agree, the subdivisions are separate entities. Version number 2 of Rav Nachman maintained, no. Whether it's mesipas or whether it's 10 tefachim, the machlekes will apply. We had Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon Rabbi. One said that the machlekes is only when the mechitzas reach up to the ceiling. But if they don't reach up to the ceiling, all agree, it's considered to be one combined entity. And we have the final version, which is really very similar to the second version of Rav Nachman, which says that the discussion now Mishnah only pertains to mechitzas which are incomplete. But if they reach all the way up to the ceiling, all agree these subdivisions are considered to be separate entities. So we seem to have 4 approaches, which are really 3. Says one Mesir, going to ask a kasha from a Brisa, Omar Rabbi Yehuda Sabar. Rabbi Yehuda Sabar was a sharp person. Rashi says Al Shem Churfe, due to his sharpness, he was called Rabbi Yehuda Sabar Lashon Svara. So we're going to ask a question Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, which was a Tana, an earlier Tana, from his approach in the Machlekes. But there's a kasha on the interpretation of Rav Nachman, who was an Amoyer, can't argue with Tana, and Rabbi Chia, Shimon Rebbe, who, as the Mepharshim explain, lived in a later generation. Therefore, it's going to be a kasha from Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, who lived earlier, and he seems to explain the Brisa a little bit different than they do. The Mishnah a little bit different than they do. Meisvei, we have a kasha from a Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Sabar. So he's discussing our machlekes, and he says like this: There's no machlekes between Beisham and Beisil al mechitzas hamagias l'tikra. If the mechitzas reach all the way up to the ceiling, in which case they look like really separate entities. Shetzrichen eruv v'chol chabura needs its own eruv. Al ma nechalku. When then is there machlekes? Al mechitzas she'ein magias l'tikra. If the mechitzas don't reach all the way up to the ceiling, in which case we have separate usage areas, but it's pretty visible that the ceiling here is all-encompassing, because there's a gap between the mechitza and the ceiling, in which case the ceiling overrides everything and sort of connects them all to one makkah. So that's the basis of the machlekes. What do we focus on? Do we focus on these separate usage areas, which is created by the partitions, or do we focus on that ceiling, which envelops everything into one grand usage, one grand living quarters? So Alma Nechalku al Mechitzas She'em Agesa Tzukra, the Machlekes only pertains to Mechitzas which don't reach up to the ceiling. Shebeshame Oimrim Erev L'chol Chabura Chabura, each group needs its own Erev, it's a separate living quarters. Ubesil Oimrim, no, the ceiling envelops everybody. Erev Echad L'kulan, one Erev on behalf of them all. So that's the Brisa with Rabbi Yehuda Sabar explaining to us that the Machlekes pertains to a case where the mechitzas don't reach up to the ceiling, but should they reach the ceiling, in which case they look like really separate entities, all agree, we treat them like separate domains. Let's analyze the Brisa and apply it to the aforementioned approaches to the machlekes. It says, according to the view that held that the machlekes pertains to where the mechitzas reach up to the ceiling, it's only there that Beis Shammai hold the separate entities. This will hold, at the end of the day, there's a ceiling covering everything, overriding everything, enclosing and enveloping everything. According to that approach, to Yufta, it's going to be refuted from this Brisa, which clearly tells us that the machlekes applies to where the mechitzas don't even reach the ceiling. But should they reach the ceiling, all agree they're separate entities. So it's inconsistent with that approach. However, according to the other approach, that the machlekes is pertaining to a case where the mechitzas don't reach up to the ceiling, so we have separate usage areas, but they're enveloped by that ceiling, because there's that gap between the mechitzas and the ceiling. So it doesn't really appear that the mechitzas are really functioning to separate these areas into separate domains. So according to that approach, siyata, we have a right from this Brisa, because it is exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Sabar says in this Brisa. It says the more lahach lishna da amar Rav Nachman. According to the first version in Rav Nachman, that he said machlekes of mesipas. Machlekes only pertains to mechitza which is less than 10 tfachim. But if it's 10 tfachim and above, all agree they're considered to be separate entities. So Yufta, that's refuted from this Brisa, which clearly tells us that you could have even very high mechitzas. As long as they don't reach the ceiling, we'll have the same machlekes. However, lahach lishna dam Rav Nachman, according to the second lashon of Rav Nachman, who said af mesipas machlekes. The machlekes pertains to mechitzas which are high up, 10 tfachim high, for instance, as long as they don't reach the ceiling. 10 tfachim high, or even mesipas, low down mechitzas, will have the same machlekes. So according to that, it's a little tricky. Lema ta'ava tiyufta. Shall we say that there's a tiyufta refutation from this brisa? Because Rabbi Yehuda Sabar tells us in this brisa that the machlekes pertains to a case where we have mechitzas mechitzas don't reach the ceiling. If they reach the ceiling, all agree that the subdivisions are regarded as separate entities. Perhaps we should infer from there that if we don't really have proper mechitzas, let's say just mesipas, less than 10 tefachim, perhaps all agree, even B'Shamai agree, that these chaburas are now living in one combined entity. Because less than 10 tefachim is not a proper mechitza. Should we infer that from this brisa? Again, because Rabbi Yehuda Kessler discusses mechitzas, perhaps does that indicate that if it's less than a proper mechitza, it's only a mesipas less than 10, there's no discussion, no machlekes. All agree it's one combined entity, and this will not be consistent with Rav Nachman, who says that the same machlekes will apply to mechitzas or even to mesipas. Says no. Rav Nachman will respond, pligi b'mechitza, v'adim b'mesipas. The same machlekes that applies to mechitzas will apply to mesipas. So even if it's a very short mechitza, less than 10 tefachim, you're going to have the same machlekes, and this is consistent with what he said. What then is the reason that the brisa here describes their machlekes as pertaining to mechitzas? Meaning, if the machlekes applies to mesipas as well, why is that not mentioned? Why does the brisa mention mechitzas? To highlight the shita beisil, that it's a chiddush. Even if you have a mechitza, 10 tefachim between the groups, that's still considered to be one and the same entity. Says more of 1 second. Why take it that direction? Why shouldn't the brisa describe their machlekes as pertaining to short mechitzas? And that will highlight shitas B'Shamai. Even though you have just very short mechitzas, B'Shamai maintain these subdivisions are regarded as separate entities. So if you're right, if your approach is correct, that the discussion between Sham and Sil applies to mechitzas and to mesipas, why did the brisa choose to speak about mechitzas rather than speak about mesipas, which will highlight the chiddush of B'Shamai? Even when you have just short, flimsy mechitzas, we consider them as separate entities. So the power of permissibility is superior. Rashi and Beitza says that it's not a big deal to be machmer. If you don't know, you're just machmer. But to be mekel, that requires confidence and knowledge and clarity. So the brisa prefers to highlight the shita of Beis Hillel, who are mater. So even if it's mechitza, which is 10 tefachim or beyond, Beis Hillel going to say that despite the fact that we have separate usage areas, the ceiling of the traklin will be mevatos mechitzas and envelop all the groups together. They're regarded as one rishus, one domain, one place of residence. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Yehuda Kessler. Indeed, the halacha concludes like Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, again, which was that the machlekes between Sham and Sil pertains to a case where the mechitzas reach up, but not all the way to the ceiling. So Beis Shammai say, well, focus on the separate usage areas, they're separate domains. Beis Hillel say, well, since the mechitzas don't reach up to the ceiling, we see that gap there. So they have that temporary nature to them, it's temporary configuration, and we look at the ceiling up above, which covers everything, which overrides everything, which envelops everything. And we consider all the chaburas as though they're living under that ceiling. It's one space, it's one rishus. So that's the correct approach to the machlekes. Amar Nachmar Yitzchak Masnisin Namideka. The wording in our Mishnah also indicates as such that the machlekes pertains to a case where the mechitas don't reach the ceiling, but if they reach the ceiling and all agree that they're considered to be separate families. The Ketani, the Mishnah says, Umaydim, all agree. Bizman shemeksosan shruin mechadorim aliyas. When you have some of these members who are residing in chadorim ubaliyas up in the upper floors, shetzrichen erev l'chol chabur v'chabur. Each one needs its own erev, because each one is living in his own living quarters. Says the word, my chadorim and my aliyas. How do we describe rooms and floors? Ilay mechadorim chadorim mamish, literally separate rooms. So Rashi says the building was designed this manner. So we have permanent walls there. Valiyas, aliyas mamish, real floors. Pshita, of course they're separate living quarters. Why would you think otherwise? Elalav, apparently we're speaking ke'in chadorim or ke'in aliyas, something which resembles rooms or floors. Umayniu, what are these? Mechitzas, mechitzas tikra. Shmamina. Apparently we're speaking about something which resembles floors or rooms, meaning we have mechitzas which go all the way up to the ceiling, which create that resemblance of a separate room. In this case, the Mishnah tells us that all agree, even Basil would agree, that we regard it as separate rishus, and they need to make an eruv. They want to transfer from one to the other. They each one have to contribute separately to the eruv and the chatzar. Indeed, this is a raya shmamino, like Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, who maintains that if the mechitzas reach all the way up to the ceiling, all agree, even Basil agree, they are regarded as separate living quarters. So let's stop for a moment. At this point in the Gemara, we had a Mishnah which said 5 groups who spent their Shabbos in a traklin, this large house, large room, separated by temporary mechitzas which create those subdivisions. Beis Shammai maintains each one is a separate group, a separate dwelling area. Each one needs to make a separate eruv. Whereas Beis Hillel say eruv echad lekulan, they're considered to be like one place of residence. And we said we have 2 ramifications here. Number one, if you consider them to be all one Mokim Dira, then they could just transfer freely throughout without making eruv. Number 2, when they go on and contribute to the eruv in the chatzar, you need 1 portion of bread and no more. We have 3 approaches to this machlekes. Number 1, that the discussion pertains to low, flimsy mechitzas less than 10 tefachim. Second approach was the machlekes pertains to a case where the mechitzas don't reach up to the ceiling. Third approach was that the machlekes only applies when the mechitzas do reach up to the ceiling. But if they don't reach to the ceiling, all agree it's one entity. We had a brisa which quoted Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, who adopted the second approach. It's only when the mechitzas don't reach the ceiling we have that machlekes. But if they reach up to the ceiling, all agree, even Basil would agree, they're considered to be separate entities. And the Gemara concluded that halacha follows the shita, and indeed we have a right from our Mishnah that when the mechitzas reach up to the ceiling, all agree they're considered to be separate entities. Now the Gemara is going to adopt a brand new approach to this machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. All agree, even Beis Shammai agrees, that everybody living within the confines of this traklin are regarded as though they're living in one and the same domain, one and the same entity. They don't need to make an eruv to transfer between subdivisions here. The ceiling of the traklin will envelop them all together. They're all considered to be living in one place of residence. There's no question about that. Where then is there a machlekes? It pertains to a general question. Rashi already addressed this in the Mishnah. Let's say we have some people living in a chatzar who've made an eruv with one another. Now they'd like to join with the chatzar next door. So they take their bread, they bring it over next door, and that connects the 2 chatzeres. How much bread is required? Should we say that every family, every house has to contribute separately? Or should we say since they've already joined together, they're one communal entity? So one fellow could just represent them all, take his own bread, bring it next door, and he represents his entire group. Now, if the eruv comes to them, they're the hosts, and certainly in their home territory, they're regarded as one and the same entity. They don't need more than one eruv. But if they're sending the eruv next door, as far as the people next door, they don't view them necessarily as one entity. This is not their home territory. So when it comes to sending the eruv here, next door, they need to each one send their own bread. Each family is to contribute separately. Each house, his own eruv, to connect the 2 chatzeres. Or should we say, no, since they're one entity, it's irrelevant whether they're at home or they're next door. One eruv on behalf of them all is enough. That's Shita's Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel holds that one can represent them all. Whereas Beis Shammai holds, if they're home, if they're hosting the eruv, yeah, they're considered to be one group. But if they're sending the eruv next door, each house has to send his own eruv. So getting back to the traklin, that's like a group that made an eruv with each other. They don't even need an eruv. There are a bunch of families, a bunch of groups living together under the umbrella of this traklin. It's as though they made an eruv with one another. It's like one communal entity. So now they'd like to join with the other members of their chatzar. So if the eruv is coming to them, they're their hosts. So certainly in their home territory, they're regarded as one entity. They don't need more than one eruv. They don't need to contribute more than one portion. But, this is agreed upon by all, but if they send their eruv material to a different home in the chatzar, so they're out of their comfort zone, out of their place of residence, out of this communal area, that's when we have a machlekes. Beis Hillel will hold, even then, one could represent them all, because they're one singular entity. Whereas Beishamai holds, if they're out of their home territory, they're sending the Erev elsewhere, each Chabur needs to contribute independently. And that's the discussion now, Mishnah. Let's see inside. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, but Mamur. When is this said? When does Basil say one Erev is enough on behalf of all the groups? When they send the Erev elsewhere. So that's when Basil holds one Erev is enough to represent them all, whereas Beishamai holds, if they're sending the Erev elsewhere, each one has to contribute. Each Chabur needs to contribute. But if the Erev was coming to them, the people in the Trackland are the hosts of the Erev. This is their hometown. This is their place of residence. Over here, they're considered to be one entity. They all agree, Erev Echad L'Kulan, one Erev portion is enough on behalf of this entire group. Says the Kaman Azla Hadasanya. That's the case. Whose shita is represented in the following brayse? Chamisha Shagavos Eruvin. If 5 people made an Erev in a Chatzar, now they'd like to connect to the Chatzar next door. When they send the Erev next door, Erev Echad L'Kulan, one Erev on behalf of all is enough. Whose shita is this? Come on, Basil. It's following Basil shita. Because Beishamai holds that when you're sending the Erev out of town, you're sending it out of your home territory, you no longer regard it as one entity, and each family, each bias needs to send separately. Continues the Gemara. There's actually another version to this approach in the Machlekes. Some say as follows, that when it comes to sending your Erev elsewhere, all agree, even Basil would agree, that you no longer regard it as one single entity. You're not in your home territory, you're connecting elsewhere, you're sending your Erev next door. That's agreed upon by all. When does Basil maintain that you only need one Erev portion on behalf of the entire group? When they are hosting the Erev at home, in their home location, they're considered to be one entity. That's Basil Shita, and Beishamai hold, no. Even then, even when they're hosting the Erev, they need to contribute independently. Because they're looking to connect to the Chatzar next door. Each one needs to make his own connection. There's another version of this approach in the Gemara. Getting back to our Trackland, that again, all agree, even Beishamai agrees, that they don't need an Erev to transfer between the subdivisions. There's no question about that. The question is when they're trying to connect to other people. When does Basil maintain that one Erev portion is enough on behalf of the entire group? When the Erev arrives at their location, they're the hosts of the Erev that they're making with the other Bnei HaChatzar. But if they're sending their Erev elsewhere, out of their home territory, out of their Trackland, the Rakoil all agree, even Basil agrees, each group needs to contribute independently. If that's the case, let's get back to that Brisa. Kaman Azla Hadasanya. Whose sheet is reflected in the Brisa which says, 5 people collected their Erev. And now they want to connect to the Chatzar next door, Eruvin. When they bring the Erev over there, to the other Chatzar, Erev Echad L'Kulan, all you need is one Erev on behalf of them all. Whose shita is this? Kaman K'lo Echad. It doesn't follow any of our shitas. So this is the third shita, meaning Beishamai and Basil, by us, both will hold that it's only when they're hosting the Erev that we consider them to be one group. But if they're sending the Erev elsewhere, with regards to their neighbors, they're no longer considered to be one group. They need to send independent Erevs. Whereas this Brisa maintains, even when you're sending it next door, you can do one Erev on behalf of them all. So in summary, we just added another 2 approaches to Machlekes Beishamai and Basil, in addition to the earlier 3 approaches. So according to this approach in the Gemara, the first version was that all agree that the members of the Trackland don't have to make an Erev with one another. They're considered to be one entity. They're enveloped by this Trackland. The question is when they're trying to connect to others. In this case, they're connecting to other people living in that Chatzar. So, if the Erev is going to be placed elsewhere out of their Trackland, now we have a Machlekes. Beishamai says, each group needs to contribute independently. Whereas Basil holds, they're considered to be one communal unit. And therefore, one can represent all the people, all the Chaburos in the Trackland. But if the Erev is coming to them, they're hosting the Erev, all agree, they only need to contribute one portion. According to the second version of the Gemara, if they place their Erev elsewhere, all agree, they're no longer considered to be one single entity. Machlekes is when the Erev comes to them, and they're hosting the Erev. Over here, they still hold. This is their home territory. Over here, they regard it as one single entity. Therefore, they don't need to contribute more than one portion. Whereas Rishami holds, even in this case, we regard them as separate chaburis. Now, as the Mefarshim speak out, when we speak about the host of the Erev contributing, it doesn't literally mean he has to contribute, because the host of the Erev, the home where the Erev is being hosted, doesn't need to add any bread. What's the point of the Erev? To make it a place of residence on behalf of all who contributed to the Erev. The person who owns the home, this is his home. This is automatically his place of residence. So that's important to point out. That when we speak about a person hosting the Erev, he only needs to contribute. One, doesn't literally mean to contribute. It means that he's automatically part of the Erev, because the Erev is in his home. And this is certainly his Makam Dira. Continues the Mishnah. Ha'achin shoyu oichlin al shulchan aviyim. We have brothers who would get their food from their father's home, so they were supported by their father. But they would sleep back at home. So we have brothers living in separate homes in a chatzar, where they would sleep, but they would actually eat from their father. In this case, as the Mishnah, tzrichan erev l'chol echad be'echad. Each brother, when he wants to make an erev with the other members of the chatzar, needs to contribute independently to the erev. We don't regard them as one single entity just because they're being supported by their father. Therefore, if one of them forgot to make an erev, he needs to do bittul to allow carrying in the chatzar. When is this said? When do they need to make an erev? So we have some other people in the chatzar who'd like to make an erev, and the erev bread is being placed elsewhere, not in their father's home. But if the erev material was actually positioned, was hosted in their father's home, to which they're all connected because they're supported by their father's home, in this case, they don't need to contribute to the erev. It's as though they're all hosting the erev. That's one thing. Well, let's say there were no other residents present in this chatzar aside from these brothers. They don't need to make an erev, because it's only when we have other people here who view these brothers as really separate entities, separate independent residents. They have their own living quarters. So if there are other people here, these brothers are considered to be separate and need to contribute to the erev. But if there's nobody else here except for the brothers, as far as themselves are concerned, regard themselves as one single entity. They belong to one household, to their father's home, in which case no erev is required. And even when there were other residents here, which necessitates an erev, so it's only if the erev is placed elsewhere, out of their father's home, do the brothers need to contribute. But if their father's home is hosting the erev, since they're connected to their father's home, they're supported by the father, considered part of the same household, they're all considered like the hosts of the erev, and a host of an erev does not have to contribute. So in summary, when the following two conditions are met, do the brothers need to contribute? Number one, we have other residents in the chatzar. Number two, the erev is placed out of the father's home. Continues the Gemara. Shma mina. We can conclude from now Mishnah. Makim lina goyim. The place where a person sleeps. That determines matters. Let's say a person eats in one place, sleeps in a different place. Two things that sustain a person, eating and sleeping. So, which one is considered to be his makim dira? From our Mishnah, we seem to see that it's the place where you sleep which determines matters. Because although the brothers eat at their father's home, since they sleep elsewhere in separate homes, we regard them as separate residents to somewhat of a degree. Now, this is inconsistent with Rav, who holds that your dining location, the mokim pita, is what determines matters. And that's considered to be your place of residence. Says Rosh Shmami, we can conclude from our Mishnah, which regards these brothers as separate entities somewhat because they sleep separately. Mokim lina goyim, the place where a person sleeps, that determines matters. Rabbi Yehuda Marav, b'mekable pras shanu. The Mishnah is describing a case where they take their food from their father's home, they bring it to their own homes, and they actually eat at home. In which case they have separate eating areas, and therefore it's considered as though they have separate residencies. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Bryce, Mish yeshli beishar. If a person owns a gatehouse, which is not a dwelling area, it's a gate, it's a little hut in front of the gate, achsadra, or this terrace, this outdoor covered area, which is not a living quarters, or a peses, or a porch, b'chatzer chaveri. He owns this property in his friend's chatzer. Hareze eino yoser olav. He doesn't make an usher upon him, meaning he doesn't have to contribute to the Eruv in that chatzer because these aren't considered to be living quarters. However, Beis HaTeven, a hay silo, Beis HaBakar, a barn, Beis HaEitzim, Beis HaEitzris. These storage areas either for firewood or for other types of things. Hareze yoser olav. If he owns these properties in his friend's chatzer, he makes it usher because these places are considered to be suitable for living, and therefore he needs to contribute to the Eruv in that chatzer. Otherwise, they can't carry in that chatzer. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, the only thing that makes usher is if he's actually living there. Having living quarters without a person there is not reckoned with. Rabbi Yehuda, I'll prove it to you. There's a story with this fellow Ben Nafcha. He owned 5 courtyards in Usha. The question was, does he have to contribute to the Sheit of Mavais, even though he's not personally there? And the story was presented to the Chachamim, and they said, the only thing that makes usher is a beis dir, a living quarters. Says the Gemara, beis dir sakadaitach? Do you mean to say just a beis dir without a person? No, rather say a place of dwelling, meaning the owner has to actually be present there for him to be required to contribute in the Eruv or the Shituf. Okay, so a machlokes between Tanakama, who maintains that a living quarters, a mokum dira, is oyser even without the person present, whereas Rabbi Yehuda maintains the owner has to be present there, the resident has to be there in order to be reckoned with. Continues the Gemara, my mokum dira. So what do we mean the owner is present? He's living there. In what way is he living? This is what we just discussed earlier. What determines matters? Rav Amar mokum pita. The dining area where he eats, that's considered to be his place of primary residence. Ushmuel Amar mokum lina, a place where one sleeps. That is considered to be his place of primary residence. The Gemara will embark on a whole discussion here regarding these shitas. What is the exact determinant of a place of dwelling? So in summary, we learned about brothers who are supported by their father, but sleep at home. The Mishnah tells us when 2 conditions are present, they are required to contribute in the Eruv. Number 1, there are other people in the Chatzar. Number 2, the Eruv is going to be placed elsewhere, not in their father's home, in which case they need to contribute to the Eruv. Now, according to Rav, who holds that the place where a person eats is considered to be his place of primary residence, so apparently in our Mishnah, they were taking their food from their father's home, bringing it to their own homes, and that's why we regard them somewhat as separate entities. According to Shmuel, who says, Mokim lina goyim, where a person sleeps, is considered to be his primary place of residence. So, in our Mishnah, the brothers are considered to be separate entities, not necessarily because they bring their food home, but rather because they sleep in their own homes, and the Mokim lina determines your place of residence. Okay, time for a brief chazara of today's daf. We began with a machlokes between a mayor who holds that they need to make an Eruv Chatzeres and also a Shituf Mavois, whereas Rabbanon hold one or the other is sufficient. According to the first approach, when they use bread, all agree one collection is enough for both. Machlokes is when they used wine for the Shituf. According to your mayor, you have to go ahead and do Eruv Chatzeres in addition to that Shituf, because wine cannot be applied for the Eruv Chatzeres, which requires bread. According to Rabbanon, once you've made a Shituf, that's all-encompassing and includes even the Chatzar. According to the second portion of the Gemara, if they used wine, all agree you need to make 2 separate things. When they used bread, Rameh holds that's not enough. You need to make 2 separate things, whereas Rabbanon hold, since you use bread, that can be applied for the Eruv and to the Shituf as one. 5 groups who spent their Shabbos in a traklan, this large room, which was separated, subdivided by these temporary mechitas. Beishami says they're considered to be separate. Basil says they're all one. We have 2 approaches in the Gemara. According to the first approach, Beishami required them to make an Eruv to carry amongst themselves from one subdivision to the other. According to Basil, they're not required to do so because they're considered to be one, living in one living quarters. We have 3 versions regarding the height of the mechitzas between these groups. According to version number 1, we're speaking about short mechitzas, less than 10 tefachim. According to this next version, we're speaking about mechitzas which are actually high but don't reach the ceiling. According to the third version, they reach the ceiling because otherwise, if they don't reach the ceiling, all agree, they're not considered to be divided. According to the second portion of the Gemara, all agree that these groups don't need an Eruv amongst themselves because they're considered to be living in one area, as though they made an Eruv to connect themselves. When is the machlekes? So according to the first version, when they bring their Eruv and place it elsewhere, they want to connect with the other people of the Chatzar, so they place their Eruv elsewhere. Beis Shammai holds, each group needs to contribute independently. Whereas Basil holds, one can represent them all. According to the next version, the machlekes pertains when the Eruv arrives to their location. They're the hosts. Even in this case, Beis Shammai will hold each group is required to contribute separately, whereas Basil holds it's their location. Over here, they're one entity. Therefore, they don't need to contribute to the Eruv. We conclude with the case of the brothers who are supported by their father and sleep at home. They're required to make an Eruv provided there are other people in the Chatzar, and then only if the Eruv is going to be placed out of their father's home.